Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, guys. Sabah al khair, and thank you so much for joining the session this morning. Our, what did we call it? We called it the level up sessions. I like that name. So every Saturday will now be level up sessions, right? And the idea is in a level up session, very quickly, within like 45 minutes to 1 hour, we want to just understand 20% of something and let our common sense appreciate the 80%. So what we're doing today is we shall be speaking about how consulting firms actually work, but at the surface level. And honestly, man, like I said to you before, one of the most kind of useful things I've done in my career is figure out how do I learn, right? And I know that might sound like whatever, bro, that just sounds like some bullshit, right? But the reality is that until you really understand how you learn, it's very difficult to, like some people do well in exams and versus others. It's not a function of they are much smarter. I just think they genuinely figured out how they learn better than others. Now, some people learn by reading, some people learn by watching YouTube videos, some people learn by drawing, some people learn by driving. And you know what I'm saying? Like figuring out that combination of things that needs to take place in order for you to digest information is very important. For me, the best way of doing it, as I've said, is understand the 20% visually, right? So hopefully, inshallah, what we're going to be discussing today is how consulting firms really work, right? So consulting firms is obviously central to the Boost Accelerator program, inherently because of the skill set, but at the same time, inshallah, let's see how it goes. So let's start off with an open discussion. So inherently, right, I think everyone knows this, that there are kind of, generally speaking, there are kind of three levels or three tiers of management consulting firms. And I don't want to call them tiers in the sense that some are better than the other. It's just how the market segregates them, right? So you've got your MBB firms at the top, you've got your tier 2 firms, and then of course you've got your big 4, right? But there are many, many more consulting firms. I mean, this in itself, we're talking about four firms here, maybe 5 or 4 here under tier 2, and then we've got 3 here. So inherently, there are many more firms than 3, 5, and 4, right? So 9, 12, right? There's many more firms than 12 firms. But here we have the McKinseys, the Bains, and of course the BCGs. And then tier 2, of course, we have, does anyone know? We have Kearney, we have Oliver Wyman, we have Strategy, and we have Deloitte Monitor, we have EYP, arguably, okay, we have Roland Berger, right? Arguably, we have Accenture Strategy. I know some people that gets them really, that really bugs them, but Accenture Strategy team is pretty good, right? So and then obviously everyone knows the big 4, right? The usual suspects. So that's Deloitte, KPMG, obviously PwC, and what's the other one? KPMG, Deloitte, EY, of course, right? So the point is, right, is that this is kind of how the market kind of segments them. And I guess the biggest distinction between the big 4 and the rest of them, right, the biggest distinction between them is that the big 4 has a traditional audit arm, right? But the audit arm is smaller than the advisory arm, right? So they do audit plus advisory. Obviously, we're not really that interested in the audit side. It's the advisory side that's interesting to us. But these big 4 firms start off with an audit background. And as a result of which, there are things that they can do, there's things that they can't do, because there can be a conflict of interest between the two. You can't audit someone and also give them advice. So they have this conflict that they have to manage, and they manage it, I guess, pretty well, right? In the sense of they're still making billions of dollars doing each. So clearly the market is very, very big, right? And I think in terms of employees, we're talking hundreds of thousands, right? In fact, I think they each employ at least like 150,000 employees, right? Between all of them, right? I think I did a thing. They employ about 2 million people, which is crazy. Like these are big firms, right? These are massive employers. So again, to go to this idea that all we do is PowerPoint presentation. That's a lot of PowerPoint, right? That's a lot of fooling CEOs that we have value to add when we really don't. All we do is PowerPoint. Right? These 12, 13 firms that we're speaking about here employ 2 million people. Surely there's got to be some value at some point, right? And again, we're talking about $200 billion of revenue as well. Absolutely mental numbers, right? You'd think that people would see that there's got to be some level of value. But from a market perspective, let's now talk about from a market perspective, right? From a market perspective, these guys focus on front-end strategy, right? But they are, and what do we mean by front-end strategy? You see that thing that we talk about, the B12 framework? That's what these guys do inherently. They help organizations identify and configure the B12, right? So strategy, business model, operating model, that's their kind of traditional role, right? But, and that's kind of also what these guys do, right? So then again, it's that typical strategy B12 type stuff, right? But obviously it's never as simple as that. It's obviously much more complicated and so on. And when you see things like Vision 2030, these guys have their handprints all over it. But as we said, right, the traditional consulting projects, they start off with some level of strategy and then they go into implementation, right? So that's the kind of traditional world within which all of these guys work in, right? Strategy, implementation. But the MBB and tier 2 guys, they tend to initially, they kind of focus like this, right? Whereas the big 4, this is a good way of putting it, would focus more like this. Does that kind of make sense, bros? So these 2 guys are the yellow, and these guys tend to be the implementation strategy. There is definitely an overlap between them. They definitely do they do step on toes and they do compete with each other, and it is what it is, but that's inherently where this world kind of collides as such. But generally speaking, if you're doing like super high-end blue ocean, is it blue ocean? Yeah, blue ocean strategy work, you would normally call these guys, and you'd also invite these guys. You might even invite these guys, but you're kind of more inclined to work with these guys, right? Because and these guys are very good, right? So the way the market dynamic works is that people who join the big 4, they want to move up, right? And once you're here, you look down on everyone. That's how it works. And that was actually the same reason that I decided to leave KPMG and join Kearney, right? That was me. It was my kind of intellectual challenge that, listen, I can do this stuff, right? Forget these guys. I'm as good as they are. I can do it too. And alhamdulillah, initially I joined Kearney as a manager after leaving Big 4, KPMG. And then I joined as a principal as well. So I actually went there twice. Not for very long though, I must add, because alhamdulillah, business was doing well. And I was just like, I don't need this stuff, man. Why am I stressing myself out for no reason? Alhamdulillah. Probably the best decision I ever made. But the thing that eludes me, right? The thing that I wish I could say, because I started speaking to the analyst. I wish I could said that I went from analyst to partner. Obviously, I left at director and I was very close to being partner. Like it was said to me, Fahad, why are you leaving, bro? Stupid. You're going to be partner very soon. Why are you leaving? But I was like, nah, man. I want to build my own business, man. I'm not Saudi, bro. Not yet, anyway. Sorry, someone's asking questions. I thought this dude was Saudi. No, I'm not Saudi, bro. But I've been in Saudi Arabia for a long time. So anyway, this is the starting dynamics of understanding management consulting firms. But there is something that unifies all of them. And I remember being on a project. So consulting firms in many instances also, right? Consulting firms, what do? They do partnerships with other consulting firms, right? Because consulting inherently is a people business, right? Consulting is a people business, right? So as part of it being a people business, some consulting firms have different specialities, right? So for example, a Corn Ferry, or what's it called, a Marsh, for example, they specialize in HR, right? The big four, for example, they can specialize in some level of accounting advisory, right? And then your strategy firms will, well, listen, we're a sector specialist in this, we're a specialist in that, right? Whatever, right? And sometimes project scopes, right? When you have a scope of work from a client, right? It's a scope of work. It might touch on, strategy. So and so what happens is consulting firms do kind of not JVs. I think JVs is an aggressive word. They just do consortiums. That's the word. They'll do a consortium, right? And again, the idea is that they just want to win the project, right? Everyone wants to win the project, and then they can divvy up the scope. So the scope might be, 15 items. You can say, okay, well, listen, we won the project, right? So we are leading the project. So we get 10 out of 15, and you get 5 out of 15, right? Is that cool? Yeah, everything's cool. Yeah, okay, cool, excellent. Let's do it. So the essence of the consulting business is people. Right now, consulting firms try to express, okay, well, it's not just people. A lot of like every single consulting firm will say, oh no, it's not just people. We have real intellectual kind of superiority over everyone else. We have insights. We have experts. We have language models, right? We have our own LLMs or whatever. We have all these different things, but it kind of always boils down to people. We have good people at scale. So the ultimate value proposition of a consulting firm is lots of people at scale. It's not really much more complicated than that, right? And anytime they don't have the insights, they bring it in, right? If they win a project about, I don't know, I worked on a project for nuclear power plants, right? And prior to that project, no one in my team had expertise in nuclear power plants. So we brought in some experts, right? So we said, we've got the consulting expertise, and we brought in some experts in nuclear power plants. And then by the end of that project, I too was I wouldn't say I was an expert, but again, 80-20, right? I understood the 20 and the 80 became clearer. So that's the nature of consulting projects. So by telling you all of this, right, the kind of common denominator between all of them is inherently their business model. So if people is their core business model, right? If people is the core value that they offer basically, hired guns, right? Assassins, right? Consultants, right? I can use other colorful terminology, but it's way too early. But inherently, if we're talking about value, right, is equals people, then inherently the business model of people in whichever industry or sector you're thinking about, if the business is people, if the business is billing, you need to build your clients, right? Then inherently it becomes a case of the number of people that you're putting onto a project. It becomes the length of the project. Right? And then it becomes the cost per person. Right? So that is inherently the business model of consulting. It's very simple, right? So effectively, if you get a scope of work, right? So you're getting a project and the client says, I need 15 things, right? I need a strategy, I need a business model, I need an operating model, I need a PMO, I need a team to design HR policies and procedures, whatever it is, right? Right. The business model of that is what kind of partners will be thinking about from the minute they go is, so how many people do I need to put on this project? So let's just say you need to put on 10 people, right? What's the length of the project? 6 months, right? So it will be 6 months times 10 people. Very simple stuff, right? But then how much is each of those people costing you, right? So let's just say each person is costing you $20,000 per month. So $20,000 multiplied by 10 people equals $200,000 a month. $200,000 a month multiplied by 6 months. So we're talking $1.2 million. That's the budget of this particular project. So 1.2 million. Make sense, guys? Very simple. It's genuinely very simple. I remember once sitting with a BCG guy, and I never really understood why he was doing this, right? He was trying to explain to me that that's not how we do it, because when I was at KPMG, I was a director, and then we did a consortium with BCG. And I was like, all right, BCG guys, this is our price. If you tell us your price, we can then combine your price. So we came up with a price of, I don't know, $600,000. That if you tell us your price, then I can combine it with ours. We can submit the financial proposal. But no, unfortunately, we don't do our pricing like this. So I was like, okay, whatever it is, tell me what it is. And then he gave me a number, which was like 750K. And I was like, how can your price be 750K and ours be 600? And we're doing 2/3 of the work. It's got to be in one of these things. Either you're putting in too many people, either you think the length of the project is incorrect, or your day rates are incorrect, right? Which of the three variables is it? He said, no, we don't price our project. I shut that fuck up. Get out of here, right? You don't know what you're talking about. Let me speak to the partner, man. You're wasting my time. And eventually I figured out that, yes, this is exactly how they they price their project. They just didn't want to tell me what their day rates were, right? So the point is here, guys, is that whichever consulting firm you're looking at, they price, whether it's MBB, Tier 2, or Big Four, they absolutely price their projects like this, 100%. So if that's the case, then, right, let's talk about the process of actually winning consulting projects. So let me just let this person into the meeting. Right. So where were we? So now let's talk about the process of actually winning a consulting project, right? And within that, we'll go into a little bit of detail, right? So the ultimate objective in consulting is to, or rather the process of winning a consulting project is as follows. So now that we understand who the consulting firms are and what they do, we also understand the business model of consulting. The discussion now is, how do consulting firms actually win projects? So like this, right? So right in the middle of this page is a contract, right? And this is pre-sales, and this is post, right? So the ultimate objective for all these consulting firms is to secure the contract, right? That's the objective. They want to win this particular contract. Now this contract, come on, man. Sorry, guys. So the idea here now is that every single consulting firm now, they want to win this contract, right? So this contract, I mean, some of these contracts are huge, right? They're not small. So they can go from like $500,000. The firms that I'm talking about, there are obviously consulting projects which are $5,000, but the ones we're talking about, they probably wouldn't take a sniff at anything less than $500,000, all the way to $20 million, right? And sometimes even more. But that's like, these are the extremes now we're talking about, right? Unless there is a piece of work which is strategic, they might even go even lower to 100K. But anything lower than that, the cost of acquiring the project will probably be higher than actually the project, unless there's a strategic rationale. If we do this $100,000 piece of work, there's a $20 million piece coming, right? So the kind of variability in terms of contract and scope is pretty significant in consulting. So the objective is, how do we get to this point where we are able to secure this? Well, it usually starts off with registering on procurement platforms, right? That's the starting point. Now, every single government has a platform which allows you to register your details, and it gives you access to projects, right? Every single government has this, right? Like a registered vendor platform. So in order to register, you have to be qualified. So you have to present to them your qualifications and so on and so forth. And this is just process, right? You have to do this. You have to be registered to be invited to bid on these contracts, right? So step one is you have to register, right? And then step two, as part of registering, you get invited. So once you've registered and you've submitted all your documentation, that could include your company documents, your experience documents, your, even sometimes your tax documents, so that you've tax filed everything correctly, yada, 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 all of which is extremely important, right? So you get invited. Once you're invited, you get sent a scope of work, right? In the scope of work, it will tell you inherently what is the requirement. So we'll say, what is the requirement? So the question is, who writes the scope of work, right? Who writes the scope of work? Now, usually, and this is how real consulting works, but before I tell you about how real consulting works, I want to tell you, okay, the way consultants, like I told you guys, right? You've got to be a bit of a mosquito if you want to be a consultant, right? So even if you're not, governments can't give contracts to people, right? Unless they are under a certain value. Now, governments can have a preference for who wins the project, but they have to work within the rules and regulations of government, right? So you can't just say, I like this guy, he's got a nice suit on, khalas, I'm going to give him $20 million. Procurement policy will not allow you to do that. But what normally happens behind the scenes is the consultant, like a mosquito that he is, he'll be, buzzing around the back, around the government entity. He'll say to the government, hey, why don't I write the scope of work for you? Why don't I help you write this, right? And the government will say, yeah, sure, that would be great, because you're going to bid on it, right? Yeah, I'm going to bid on it, right? And obviously, by being the mosquito and hovering around this, they help the government write the scope of work for free, right? And of course, if you wrote the scope of the project, the likelihood of you writing, therefore, a proposal, right, which is inherently more aligned with what the expectations are, then of course. So this is the stuff that happens behind the scenes, right? It doesn't happen every time, but I would say 8 out of 10 times it's happening. So so the process is, you first have to register, right? And then of course you first you have to register, right? You have to register, and then you get invited, and then you write a proposal, right? Yes, that's the proposal. And then if your proposal is selected, then you can, basically have a chance at winning this particular contract, right? That's the actual process. But what happens behind the scenes is consulting firms are kind of, building relationships behind the scenes. So just because, and this is where a lot of people get it wrong, right? Just because people are registered on vendor platforms, right? And like I said, every single government has one of these, and even private companies have these as well. The reality is that the stuff that's happening behind the scenes is really what determines whether you're going to be successful or not in terms of the consulting project, right? So I get invited a lot. Like my friend will say, oh, by the way, bro, we can do a project together. Let's write this proposal, and inshallah we'll win it, and then we'll go 50-50. And I'm like, bro, who do you know in that particular entity? Who do you know, right? And they'll say, I don't know anyone, bro. I just saw the RFP. And I'm like, you know what, bro? With all due respect, I'm out, right? Unless you know. So again, as a small business, even as a medium or even a big business, right? Writing proposals and scopes of work, etc., is cost. Because anything that takes you away from, this is business development, so henceforth, this takes up time and energy, right? So I don't ever bid on projects unless I know the person who's actually going to be awarding. Not because I can manipulate them, I just know I have a relationship with them, and I know whether or not it's going to be worth my time. Because every time you write a proposal, it takes a lot of time and energy, right? So, and in many instances, when you're working with the government, you have to buy these, right? So they invite you, they invite you to buy a scope of work. They'll say, okay, this scope of work costs $1,000, for example. So if you want to bid on a project that's 20 million, you got to pay us 1,000. And even if you don't win, sorry, man, that's just part of doing business, right? So again, this thing adds up. And the usual rule of thumb is that you'll probably win if you're talking about a good kind of an exchange rate, almost 4 out of 10. So 4 out of 10 projects that you bid on, you should be trying to win, right? So it gets complicated, right? But this just comes with experience. But the point is, if you don't have that initial relationship, right, that 4 out of 10 I've spoken about becomes more like 1 out of 10. So you can spend a lot of time trying to win projects with people who you have no relationship with, but in my experience, it doesn't turn out well. So henceforth, if you qualify at this level, you then qualify at this level, then you're going to submit a proposal. The proposal is twofold. There's a technical proposal, and then there is a commercial proposal. The commercial proposal is basically your price, and you have to separate your technical from your price, because the way procurement works in most countries and in most governments is that you have to score above 80%, I think 70%, right? Technical score in terms of compliance, right? In order for your commercial proposal to open. So they open this first. If you qualify, then they open up the commercial proposal. And then what they do is like, okay, well, this is 70-30 split between technical and commercial. And they weighted average score. And then they say you've qualified. And then there's a bit of negotiation, right? So if there are two companies who have qualified technically and also qualified commercially, then they'll kind of head to head, who's going to give us the best price because you're both good, right? That's how it works. And then eventually they will give you a contract. And then again, it could be a huge contract and stuff like that and whatever, right? But that's how you get to a point of contracting. Now, this process, depending on the nature of the project, can take months. This can take a couple of weeks sometimes if they need to expedite. So again, that's how you get to a point where that's how you win projects in consulting, right? So people who have a lot of experience in kind of winning projects, etc. This is where they, like kind of what I do for my consulting business. I focus here, right? This is what I'm focusing on. And if anyone knows Arpus, you know that we have Mu'adh, and Mu'adh takes care of everything else. My job is to win this and keep people happy, and then his job is to deliver. So he and the team then go ahead and deliver the projects as such. But once you get the contract, what happens, right? What happens here, right? Well, this is what starts to happen. Immediately, you get awarded. So once you're awarded, alhamdulillah, amazing, everyone's really happy. But I want to show you this from two different angles, right? I want to show you this from a cash flow perspective, and I want to show you this from a project perspective. So normally what happens, right, is from a project perspective. From a project perspective, immediately what you need to do is show that you're ready to hit the ground running. So what do? The first thing is you do a kickoff presentation, right? So effectively what you do is you use slides, you use content that you created during the proposal, right? So some of the proposal stuff, you put it into your kickoff meeting, and you put together within your kickoff meeting your plan. This is how we are going to actually do the project itself, right? So once we do the kickoff, we initiate. Normally, again, it's not rocket science. We do some kind of current state assessment, right? Based on the current state assessment, we come up with some hypotheses, right? What could we be doing? Based on the hypotheses, we do some analysis. Based on the analysis, we come up with some recommendations, right? And then, of course, if all goes well, then recommendations turn into kind of activities and action plans. That's what a traditional management consulting project starts to look like. Now, this process can either take weeks or it can take months. So depending on the nature of the project, this for me is almost the most universal consulting approach, right, to any project. The most universal consulting approach is you do a kickoff meeting, you do a current state assessment, you come up with some hypotheses, you do some analysis, you provide some recommendations. That for me, that 4-step process is almost every single project ever that I've done in my life, right? And the reasoning for this, right, is because you have to always remember, as a consultant, you always have to provide justification. There has to be a justification, right? Justification, right? And not only justification, you also have to get engagement. You have to get people aligned, right? So engagement, alignment. You have to constantly do that, right? So some of these a lot of the time, again, people misunderstand the decision-making process in firms, right? The decision-making process in an organization is, you know, the understand. Okay, so direction comes from the top, right? 100%. So you've got your leaders, you've got your managers, and then you've got your workers, right? One of the hardest things that you do in any organization, right? Any kind of transformation, if you've ever heard of the word transformation or any kind of project, right? Is remember, organizations are living organisms, right? And they are people. You're talking about people. One of the most complicated things to do in business, right, is getting the alignment from the top all the way to the bottom. So remember, if leadership is direction and the workers are your enablers, it's a good way of thinking is that an organization is a human being. So the head would be the leaders, the managers, would be the hands, and then the workers would be the legs. So they all need to work in tandem in order for any kind of outcome to be achieved. And that might sound like, oh, he's just going off on a consulting rant, but that's how it works. So whenever you're doing a kind of consulting project, ensuring that alignment to the maximum extent possible is critical. Without that alignment, nothing ever changes. And it's one of the most kind of common reasons why, when we talk about transformation projects, transformation at this level might sound excellent. Oh, what we need to do is use robots, right? And then as soon as you introduce robots, even the managers might agree, but the actual enablers, they'll be like, screw this, man, we're going to lose our jobs. So we're not interested in entertaining this. We're going to cause as many issues as possible. So henceforth, again, the idea here is that whenever you're doing your projects, it's the process, which is current state, followed by hypothesis, followed by analysis, followed by some kind of recommendation. There has to be this constant, engagement, justification, because the role of the consultant it doesn't stop at purely insights. And again, there's a massive misconception about consultants where we come and we teach the client. We're there to tell the client, oh my God, you guys are idiots. No, man, I've never been in a meeting where a client has been like, Fahad, can you just explain to me in my business? Because really, I don't understand it. I am the CEO. Yes, I get paid $1 million a year, but I don't actually understand my business. Can you tell me something about my business? A lot of the time and effort is spent here in this engagement and justification, right? And the reasoning for that is, and I want to explain why it's so important, right? Why is this so important when we're talking about in the consulting world? Because, right, the way of the decision-making process and the governance of organizations, right? So every single organization in the world has a governance process. So what is governance, right? Well, governance inherently is the rules, the policies, the processes, all designed to keep the organization safe. Keep the organization safe from who? The CEO, the board of directors, the procurement team, the legal team, right? It's basically governance is designed to keep the organization safe from everyone, because ultimately all of these people report to who? They report to the investors, the owners, right? So governance within organizations inherently requires you to have organizations inherently require you to have basically this protection in place for investors. So a CEO, just because he's the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, he can't say tomorrow we're going to invest $2 billion in ice creams, right? Because that's like, wait, hold on, what happened here, right? Finance, whatever. There's going to be multiple stakeholders throughout this, right? Employees being another one. Wait, we are a technology company. Why are we investing in ice creams, right? And the reason he can't do that is because the governance process will not allow him to do that, right? The governance process will be something like this. The CEO has to propose to the board that we need to invest in ice creams. And the board of directors will say, hell no, man, what are you talking about, bro? We run schools, man. We don't need nothing to do with ice creams. So then that idea shuts down. But in order for the investors and the shareholders to be protected, this process of decision making has to take place. And henceforth, this becomes very, very important, like the whole governance process. And who gets involved in this process? Consultants, right? Now, at some point, I would like to think, in the example that I've given, the consultant would say, what the hell's wrong with you? Why are you trying to spend $2 billion on ice creams, right? But sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes consultants say, yeah, look, okay, we'll do the research and the homework for you. But remember, whilst this is happening, the CEO has to manage the business on a day-to-day basis, right? Day to day, right? So this part of his business is 2% of his overall workload. He still has 98% here. And his team, his CFO, his CIO, his CTO, his C anything O, and all the people, they still have to do this. So the idea is that these organizations bring in consultants from a governance perspective, but also from a capacity perspective. And the governance requires, in many instances, a third-party independent person to come and help them make these big decisions. So that is inherently how consultants work within the governance and decision-making process. CEOs, board of directors, head of procurement, legal, these are fancy job titles, but organizations are designed from the beginning with the first instinct, which is, we got to protect this business and we can't let one person have too much power. And so the role of the consultant is to jump in the middle and provide that kind of extra layer of communication. Now, before it goes from CEO to board of directors, right? Before it goes from there to there, you have to, if we go back, right? It has to go up and down this value chain, right? It has to go, and you have to effectively test the feasibility from an operational perspective, right? So before the CEO, for example, don't need to raise your hand, or just jump in, bro. So no, sorry, what was I saying? Yeah, sorry. So before the CEO, and here's another common misunderstanding. People think organizations stop at this level, right? So you have your CEO and your kind of the C-suite, then you have your managers, etc., whatever, right? And then of course you have your everyone else, right? Everyone else. People think that that's the decision-making process. It's not. After this, you have your board of directors, right? And then you have your chairman, right? After this, you have investors, right? After this, you would have regulators, right? Or in parallel, at least, right? So again, in order for the CEO to present an idea up, consultants are usually brought in to help them either justify or make the decision go away. We're not there to teach the CEO how to be a CEO. That's where a lot of people get it wrong. I mean, they make stupid jokes that, oh, all you do is this and all you do is that, blah, blah, blah. It's dumb, right? That's not how organizations work. And this is why I say, when people say stupid comments on my TikTok videos, right, I just let them because it helps the algorithm. I don't care, right? But ultimately, the point is that they don't understand how organizations work. First, you need to do this, but the structures within an organization are designed to protect it. So this is what it's designed to protect. This is what it's designed to protect. This is what it's designed to protect. This is what it's designed to protect, right? So obviously, if you piss off the regulator, your business isn't going to last. Who's it going to affect? It's going to affect the investors, right? If your board of directors and chairman, right, he can come up with ideas, but ultimately the approvals happen at this level. Now, the CEO is one of the members of the board in many instances, and sometimes the board and the chairman of the board is also the CEO. It happens, right? It just depends on the governance structure that has been signed off, right? But inherently, there's pros and cons for lots of these things. So understanding the decision-making process is critical to understanding consulting. So that being said, like, that hopefully gives you a bit of context as to how this all works. So a lot of people, the value of consulting is misunderstood because we're seen as academics. We're not academics, we're decision-making support, right? And I say that, you know, like I talk about the language of decision makers. This is the language of decision makers, right? Understanding that decision makers are bound by certain structures. Decision makers speak in certain priorities. Decision makers have to work in a, understanding the dynamics between thinking and execution and so on and so forth. But all of these things constitute the decision-making process. So henceforth, that's where consultants are getting involved in, right? So if we talk about how consulting firms really work, in summary, we've got our MBB, we've got our tier 2, we've got our big 4, right? These are the traditional, the kind of consulting firms. We talk about, okay, well, what is the actual business of consulting? It's people, right? We provide qualified people, right? Intellectual insights, LLMs, whatever, right? But the business model is very simple. Number of people, right? Multiplied by the length of the project, multiplied by the day rate, and that gives you a budget, right? And that's the cost of your project. But it's not as easy as that. You have to win these projects. So winning them starts by registering on a platform, receiving a scope of work, preparing a proposal, and ideally winning that. And then once you're in, you kind of go through the process of a kickoff meeting, current state assessment, hypothesis, analysis, recommendation, but also understanding the dynamics of the organization. So once you understood the dynamics of the organization, it's a case of, okay, well, we are not there to teach the CEO or the board of directors. We're there to help them make a decision, right? Because the governance within an organization 100% requires it. So a CEO can't make a big decision on his own. The board of directors can't reject a decision on its own. Procurement can't give contracts to their friends. Legal can't approve things which are broken. Finance can't approve payments without the requisite authorities. Why is this so important? Because organizations are inherently designed to protect their investors, right? And they are there to, if they protect the investors, they are inherently there also to protect the life of the organization, right? Organizations have to be going concerns, which basically means they have, legitimacy in terms of their business rationale. If they don't, they won't continue. So again, consultants aren't here to teach. Consultants are here to facilitate decision making in light of governance structures, and understanding that CEOs' first priority is the 98%, which is to manage the core business on a day-to-day. Consultants aren't there to teach them how to run the business on a day-to-day. We're there to help them make decisions about other things that are happening. For example, in the news today, let's do an example, right? And in the news this morning, this is the reason I was late to the session, to be honest, right? So Coca-Cola owns Costa Coffee, right? And they bought Costa Coffee like 5-10, maybe, I don't know, like 7 years ago for like £5 billion, right? Mental, right? They bought, and now they're trying to sell it for 2 billion, right? They're trying to, $2 billion, right? And a couple of private equity firms, few private equity firms have offered them this kind of money for it, right? So in order to buy something for 5 billion, there would have been a huge governance structure that they would have had to go through all of these different discussions as to, yes, this is a good acquisition, we should do this, let's bring in the consultant can help us facilitate this decision, right? Get our investors on board, ensure that our business, the core Coca-Cola business, is not going to be ruined, and so on and so forth, right? So they bought it for $5 billion, right? And 3 years later, or 5 years later, rather 3 to 5 years later, it's decided that it's a dog shit business, we don't need it, right? So henceforth, they are now trying to sell it. So what's going to happen now is they're going to bring in the consultants to help them value it, and they are now going to open up bids. Oops, sorry, where are we? Well, they're going to open up bids from who? From private equity firms, right? So KKR is trying to get involved, and there's a couple of other big organizations that want to get involved. So they're going to start bidding on this, right? So the job of the CEO is not to just take the one that's offering them 2.0. It's not about 2.1. Oh shit, they're offering us 2.3. It's not that. It's going to be the terms and conditions associated, right? There's going to be lots of terms and conditions associated. It's going to be the one that gives the market the best signal for Coca-Cola, and so on. And so there's lots of variables, but again, the process of determining which person buys this has to go through a decision making process. And again, all of this stuff that we spoke about here, from a governance perspective, from a decision-making, you have to go through this every single day. But remember, the CEO of Coca-Cola is human. He only has 24 hours a day. His job is to first manage Coca-Cola, which is 98% of the revenue of the entire Coca-Cola empire, right? This is only 2%. So he will bring in the consultants to facilitate some of that decision-making. Now, understanding, right, that Coca-Cola is like $120 billion a year. So I'm trying to contextualize. A lot of people think consultants get paid a lot of money. They do. They very, very much do. But I also want to put into context how much money some of these organizations make, right? So Coca-Cola, if someone wants to do a quick Google on it, I think their revenues are about $120 billion a year, right? They are going to sell Costa Coffee for about $2 billion, even though it's at a write-off. They are making a loss on it, 100% they're making a loss on it, right? But so the CEO and the executive team are managing this on a day-to-day basis. They now have an additional thing they need to manage, which is this. So effectively, paying $2 million to consultants to help them manage this process, right? As a percentage, what are we talking about here? All right, so $1 billion is 1,000 million, right? So we are talking about 0.01, right? Is that right? Is my maths right there? It's 1/10 of a percent. So I know it seems like consultants get paid a lot, but you have to understand that the nature of some of the businesses that we're talking about is absolutely mental, right? You know, like when you go to a supermarket and you see all these different products and all these different, food this and washing powder that, it's like 5 companies, huh? It's like 5 companies that service the entire supermarket that you buy from. It's just lots of different brands within that context. So you have to understand that these companies are making shit tons of money, right? Like we're all scrounging out here, 100,000 pounds, 200,000 pounds a year, $50,000 a year, $500,000 a year. The way to think of it is however much a company pays you, and I want you guys to do this. Think about whatever your salary is, right? Whichever country you're in, right? If the company is paying you, say, denominations of anything, 100x, right? The reality is that company is probably making times 5 that from you. And if it's less than times 5, the question is, really? So whatever salary you're getting, right, a company will probably be earning times 5 of that. I know that's how it works in consulting. So I used to get paid very well. So whilst I was at KPMG, I think I was on like $300,000 a year. Whilst I was at Kearney, I was on like $500,000 a year. They could only justify paying me that if they were making times 4 to 5 of that. That's the only way that would make sense, right? Now, I appreciate that's a service business and that's, sector specific and stuff like that. But so let's just say whatever your salary is, 3 to 5x is what type of value you're offering that company. So when we talk about companies like, I don't know, Apple and these guys, right? These guys are doing these types of transactions every single day. We're talking hundreds of, not millions, hundreds of billions a day. So again, this idea that, these guys have all the time in the world, they need consultants. A lot of the time they need consultants, not because of an expertise. They need consultants from a context of capacity. They don't have the capacity. And for the sake of governance. That's why big firms use consultants, not because of expertise, it's capacity and governance. It requires them to do so. So even, when like a lot, the joke that I probably get, it's not even a joke. I think people genuinely believe this stuff, right? B-Boy Homes, Same thing with bankers, bro. The bankers is the same. I'll show you the investment banking model as well, just so you guys see it, right? The investment banking model is slightly different, but similar. You know, it's mental. Just let me let this one person into the meeting. Did someone join? No. Okay, whatever. Right. So let's talk about investment banking, right? If PowerPoint lets me, that is, of course. Investment banking works in exactly the same way. Well, no, it doesn't. Actually, no, it doesn't. But okay. So let's just say there is a business, a business, right? It wants to acquire another business, right? So this is company A and this is company B, right? And this business, the first step that an investment bank would do is firstly, it will find an acquisition target, right? So it will work with these guys here and say, okay, you know what you need? You need XYZ. And we can help facilitate, we can help find a good acquisition target. So they will then do their research and then they'll say, okay, well, we found a great acquisition target. It makes strategic sense. It makes financial sense. It makes operational sense. We will help facilitate it, right? So they'll say, okay, well, this company, first thing they'll do is this company is worth $2 billion, right? And you'll be like, okay, well, shit, we don't have the money for a $2 billion transaction, right? The investment bank will say, hey, don't worry about it, homie. I got you, man. I've got you, right? Not only am I going to value the company, not only am I going to find the strategic rationale and all that stuff, I am also going to help you fund the transaction of $2 billion. Don't worry, I got you, homie. So I am going to use the bank that I work for, plus a syndicate of investors, plus a syndicate of other banks, right? So my balance sheet, whatever, to give you the money in order for you to facilitate the transaction. But in order to facilitate the transaction, I am going to ask from you lots of fees. Number one, for all of that facilitation. So there'll be a fee at this level, there'll be a fee at that level, right? This is how investment banks work, right? So inherently, investors, banks, yeah, and other banks, and this is process called syndication, right? So no one is going to give one organization $2 billion, right? It's usually a syndication, means multiple entities come together, right? So you would have your debt, you'll have your equity, right? All of this will come together and say, we got the 2 billion, homie, but from the 2 billion, just to facilitate the transaction, we want 2%. Now, what's 2% of 2 billion? Right? $20 million, man. So just off this one transaction, just off the fees alone, they make $20 million. This is why investment bankers get paid so much, right? It is literally connecting the dots, but it's much more complicated than that, right? So that's just the fees. In addition to the fees, they'll say, well, we also want a success fee, right? So the success fee could be between 1% to 3% of the transaction value. So an additional 1% of 2 billion would be an additional 20 million. So we're now talking 40 million, right? And in addition to that, it might actually be, okay, well, it might be between 20 and 40 million, depending on the complexity of the transaction, right? So now their fees have gone up from 20 million to 20, right? So in total, we're talking about 40 million just to facilitate this. So they will help you find a company. They will give you the mechanism to then acquire the company. And then that's it. And then eventually, when these investors want to sell their investment and these banks want to move on, they'll call the bankers in again, and the bankers make, effectively, the bankers make small percentages on big numbers, right? That's all bankers do. Boutique banks do the same thing as well. Now, bearing in mind what we're talking about is investment. This is what an investment bank does, right? You know, when people talk about M&A, this is what M&A is, right? This is what I've described here as M&A. So this is the essence of what they do. Basically, they make a small percentage on a huge number. But in many instances, we as kind of employees on the ground, we don't see this. We don't get exposed to this because all we're caring about is the job that we do. when we start thinking about the conversations that are happening at the the top 5 percentile of conversations, it's stuff like this. And then the conversation is, man, he's just added a $2 billion business. So now we were worth 5 billion. Now we are worth 7 billion. Is that 40 million worth increasing the size of our organization by 50%? $40 million is what we have to pay to increase the value of our business by here. The CEO will overnight, his paycheck will increase by 10x. His share portfolio in the business will increase by 5x. He will be the hero. He'll probably get $5 million bonus just for doing this. Do you see how it's all interconnected and everyone's incentivized in the same way? So this acquisition process, I said that there is a bank bill. I said banks. So banks won't lend equity; they would lend debt, right? They would lend the debt. So again, the point is the arranger, right? The investment bank that's arranging all of this, they get fees on everything, fees on fees on fees on fees. That's why investment bankers get paid so much, because they are effectively arrangers, right, of debt and equity. But investment bankers go a little bit further. I'll tell you a funny story here, right? Obviously, I work very closely with the Saudi government, and for people who are in the UK anyway, they will know this, right? There's a guy who used to be the Chancellor of the UK. What was his name? Not Rishi Sunak. He was the Prime Minister, but he was the Chancellor as well. But previous to him, there's a guy called Sajid Javid, right? Sajid Javid used to be loosely, because he still is, an investment banker. This is how he made his millions, by doing this, right? Millions upon millions, right? So I have a friend who is a very, very senior member of a government entity in Saudi Arabia. And I picked him up from his hotel. We went out for lunch, and he was saying to me, Fahad, I met one of your friends today. I was like, what do you mean? What friend of mine? You didn't meet any of my friends. My friends all live in the ghetto, man. What are you talking about? You didn't. He's like, no, there's that Pakistani ex-politician, forgot his name, Sajid Javid. I was like, what? What are you doing meeting Sajid Javid? He's like, oh yeah, he's trying to sell some stuff to us. So Sajid Javid saw my friend, who's the CFO of this massive government entity. He's trying to, again, he's just doing exactly the same thing here. So Rishi Sunak is slightly different. That's more hedge funds. Hedge funds, again, the business model is the same. It's a percentage of a big number. So if a hedge fund identifies an investment and it goes up in value by 20%, right, they will take 5% of the 20% as their bonus fee, right? That's how hedge funds work, right? So they will manage portfolios on behalf of other people's, and they use certain investment techniques to make that all happen. But anyway, I've gone off on one, and we've hit the 1 hour time limit. So I was trying to make these the 80-20 sessions, so the level up session. So today, guys, no one who's sat through this whole thing can say to me they don't understand consulting and they don't understand investment banking. Any questions, homies? Yalla, hit me up.
Hi, Assalamualaikum. So you said your Saudi friend said that your friend was Sajid Javid. How do you know Sajid Javid, or did I miss that?
No. I don't know. He said as a joke, I was like, bro, so what did you do today? He's like, oh yeah, I was in meetings. I met your friend today, Sajid Javid. I was like, why? Why did you meet him? He's like, yeah, he's trying to sell me this business. And I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
So investment bankers are inherently salespeople. That's all they are. All they are doing is they are effectively corporate. And this is going to sound horrible because it is very, very complicated work, right? But you are effectively a corporate estate agent, a corporate real estate broker, right? But rather than selling pieces of land, you are effectively selling companies. That's it. But these companies are worth hundreds, if not billions of dollars. I'm not too sure what I just said there, but supposedly I got flagged for a hate speech. I'm not sure what I said, but anyway. So yeah. So that's the world of consulting and the world of investment banking. So when you're talking about the size of the value creation, the money that consultants are paid is nothing, man. Literally nothing, right? And I think sometimes people lose sight of how big organizations are. You know, like when we're talking about Coca-Cola, 100 billion pounds a year or dollars a year plus revenues. When we're talking about Pepsi, again, we're talking about Aramco, we're talking trillions. You know, when we're talking about Apple, trillions, Nvidia, trillions. And these organizations are all managed by human beings. And as part of being managed by human beings, the idea is that the governance structures are there to protect these organizations because humans can actually screw them up. So yeah.
Fahad, I wanted to to also mention, I mean, the governance part, and I think this is where it's I mean, it's really almost missing, and that's what's leading a lot of I would say conflicts now in the I mean the big consulting firms, because it used to be, I would say, more organized in terms of governance before, but now the more focus is just on winning projects, not actual having a real governance system in place.
Absolutely, bro. I mean, look, the reality is governance in organization. Guys, if you're asking for my YouTube, yeah, it's the Boost Accelerator program. If you do it, you'll find me. If you go to the link in my bio, there's a bunch of videos there. But absolutely, governance is a set of rules, right? What happens when people understand the rules? What's the human instinct? You're looking for loopholes, right? You're looking for gray areas, right? Yeah. You're looking for, you know, and that's, I guess, what Ahmed is mentioning, that governance is set of rules, and henceforth people like to think about, you know, where can we twist this? Where can we do, you know? Then it becomes about interpretation. Yeah, man. So that's what it boils down to. So yeah. And if you want to learn this stuff, sorry, this is for the guys on TikTok. Boost Accelerator program, and make sure you go to the link in my bio and subscribe, because we do this almost every day now. So inshallah khair. So what do you guys think, man? Any questions here? Anyone want to jump in with some questions?
So Fahad,
Tell me,
sounds
bro.
like investment bankers are middlemen on steroids.
Bro, that's a great way of explaining it. They are middlemen not on steroids, usually on cocaine. But yes, yeah, that's their choice of stimulant.
Yeah, it puts everything into perspective.
Yeah. So but the point is, bro, look, we spoke about kind of consulting, right? How do consulting firms work? But this is really about how professional services work, right? So as a function of professional services working, it's who are the players, you know, what is the core essence of their business, you know, how do they, and this is not only how consulting firms work, this is how construction firms work. It works in the same way, right? They register, they get the scope of work, they put together a proposal, they win. This is how you do projects with the government. Now, obviously that's different for construction, different for, you know, supplying even meat, for example. I remember we did a project once for the government where we had to review all of their food contracts to help save the government billions of dollars. And we did. What we learned is that the government was buying like this super luxurious meat for prisoners. Wallahi, this is a project I worked on, right? That we had to do a procurement optimization, and we're like, man, you guys are feeding these prisoners some luxury lamb, man. Maybe we could tone down the lamb by some normal lamb, not this luxury one. And they were like, yeah, actually, yeah, that saves about 2 billion riyal a year or something. You know, that was crazy. So alhamdulillah.
Gourmet prison food.
Yeah, exactly. Make them stop making 5-star meals, man. But alhamdulillah, you know what I'm saying? But these are the things that happen, right? And remember, governance is designed to protect organizations. So the consultants, the bankers, we understand this, and therefore we kind of jump in and out as we need to. But anyway, I'm going to upload this session onto the group, inshallah. As soon as it renders, it just takes so long to render. But eventually, inshallah, between now and New Year's, I've got 1 million videos to record and upload. But alhamdulillah, I know you guys are seeing it. The community is coming together nicely. People are engaging, you know, and inshallah, in the new year, we'll start all the LinkedIn sessions as well. to get everyone to actively, not just networking within the community, but networking externally as well. So this is going to go crazy, inshallah. Man. Inshallah, hopefully you guys stick around for all of that.
Inshallah.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
All right, my bros. On that note, I am now going to go back to bed and do some TikToking. Yeah, I'm just kidding. All right, man. Jazakallah khair, guys. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Salam.
go ahead.
All right, TikTok. That's me done. Appreciate there's still 80 people here. If anyone has any questions, now's a good time to ask, because otherwise I'm gonna bounce. Anyone has any questions? Where am I? What am I trying to do here? There we go.